Chapter 7, War Horse. Today we are going to read Chapter 7, and as we're reading, we're going to listen for likable and unlikable traits for Trooper Warren. Chapter 7 is pages 49 through 57, and so we're going to take a look at his character attributes. It was just after reveal the next morning, and we were rummaging around in our nose bags for the last of our oats when I saw Captain Jamie Stewart striding along the horse lines toward us. Behind him, swamped in a vast greatcoat and a peaked cap, trailed a young trooper I had never seen before. He was pink-faced and young under his hat, and he reminded me at once of Albert. I sensed that he was nervous of me, for his approach was hesitant and reluctant. Captain Stewart felt Tophorn's ears and stroked his soft muzzle as he always did the first thing in the morning, and then reaching across he patted me gently on the neck. "Well, Trooper Warren, here he is," said Captain Stewart. "Come closer, Trooper. He won't bite. This is Joey. This horse belonged to the best friend I ever had, so you look after him, you hear?" His tone was firm, but not unsympathetic. "And, Trooper, I will be able to keep my eye on you all the time because these two horses are inseparable." Okay, so here he's talking about Topthorn and Joey. So again, if I wanted to go back to my motif chart, this is page 50. So right here, I could add page 50. These two horses are inseparable. And then he's going to go on to say they're the two best horses in the squadron. So again, we're tracking friendship as we continue to read. They're the two best horses in the squadron, and they know it. He stepped closer to me and lifted my forelock clear of my face. "Joey," he whispered, "you take care of him. He's only a young boy, and he's had a rough ride in this war so far." So when the squadron moved out of the wood that morning, I found I could no longer walk alongside Topthorn as I had before with Captain Nichols, but was now just one of the troop following behind the officers in a long column of troopers. But whenever we stopped to feed or drink, Trooper Warren was careful to walk me over to where Topthorn stood so that we could be together. Okay, I like that. Trooper Warren would walk Joey over to visit Topthorn. So I like that about him. He's really trying to take care of Joey. Trooper Warren was not a good horseman. Okay, so that's something that he didn't like about him. He was not a good horseman. So that's probably one of his unlikable traits. That just means that he wasn't very comfortable for Joey when he would get on Joey's back. I could tell that the minute he mounted me. He was always tense, and he rode me heavy in the saddle like a sack of potatoes. So he was tense, and he rode him heavy. So these are unlikable things that Joey didn't like about him. He had neither the experience and confidence of Corporal Samuel Perkins nor the finesse and sensitivity of Captain Nichols. All right, so he lacked experience, sensitivity, finesse, and confidence. These were things that Joey didn't like. He rocked unevenly in the saddle, and he always rode me on the reins too tight so that I was forced to toss my head continuously to loosen it. But once out of the saddle, he was the gentlest of men. All right, so he was unlikable. He was uncomfortable. He was an uncomfortable rider, let's say. But on the other hand, the likable trait is he was very gentle. He was meticulous and kind in his grooming. All right, meticulous means but he did a really good job. He was very careful about it, meticulous and kind, and grooming. So you see, we're getting lots and lots of information. Sometimes when you just start reading, you can pick up on these strategies, these comprehension strategies real easily. So this was constantly comparing things that Joey liked and things he didn't like about Trooper Warren. So it was very obvious that this would be a good strategy to use with this chapter. He was meticulous and kind in his grooming, and he attended at once to my frequent and painful saddle sores, chafings, and leg swellings, to which I was particularly prone. Now, I'm not going to continue to jot. I think you've got the idea. I want you to do some work on your own. So I'm just going to read, and I'm going to let you take over the work in your own notebook, and you can add the things that you hear that need to be added to Likable and Unlikable. He cared for me as no one had since I left home. Over the next few months, it was his loving attention that was to keep me alive. There were a few minor skirmishes during that first autumn of the war, but as Captain Nichols had predicted, we were used less and less as cavalry and more as transport for mounted infantry. Whenever we came across the enemy, the squadron would dismount, drawing their rifles from their buckets, and the horses would be left behind, out of sight, under the care of a few troopers, so that we never saw any action ourselves, but had the distant crackle of rifle fire and the rattle of machine guns. When the troop returned and the squadron moved off again, there were always one or two horses without riders. We would be on the march for hours and days on end, it seemed, when suddenly a motorcycle would roar past us through the dust, and there would be the barked commands and the shrill call of the bugles, and the squadron would swing off the road and into action once more. It was during these long, stifling marches and during the cold nights that followed that Trooper Warren began to talk to me. He told me how in the same action in which Captain Nichols had been killed, his horse had been shot down from beneath him, and how only a few weeks before he had been an apprentice blacksmith with his father. Then the war had broken out. So he was just doing everyday life, and then all of a sudden he was called in to war. He didn't want to join up, he said, but the squire of the village had spoken to his father, and his father, who rented his house and his blacksmith shop from the squire, had no option but to send him off to war. And since he had grown up around horses, he volunteered to join the cavalry. I tell you, Joey, he said one evening as he was picking out my hooves, I tell you, I never thought I would get on a horse again after that first battle. Strange thing is, Joey, that it wasn't the shooting. Somehow I didn't mind that. It was just the idea of riding a horse again that terrified the life out of me. You wouldn't think that possible, would you? Not with me being a blacksmith and all. Still, I'm over it now, and you've done that for me, Joey, giving me back my confidence. I feel I can do anything now. Feel like one of those knights in armor when I'm up on you. So it sounds like that Joey has really helped him as he's taking care of Joey. So again, here's clues of friendship that we could jot down our motif chart. Then with the onset of winter, the rain came down in sheets. All right, so do you feel this transition right here? Anytime that you're transitioning from one thing to another, you want to break it into a new paragraph, and you want to start out with some good transition so that your reader feels the transition. It was refreshing at first and a welcome break from the dust and the flies. But soon the fields and paths turned to mud beneath us. The squadron could no longer camp in the dry because there was no shelter, and so both man and horse were constantly soaked to the skin. There was little or no protection from the driving rain, and at night we stood now to our fetlocks in cold, oozing mud. But Trooper Warren looked after me with great devotion, finding shelter for me whenever and wherever he could. So again, there's some likable traits. Rubbing some warmth into me with whiffs of dry straw whenever he could find it, and ensuring that I always got a good ration of oats in my nose bag to keep me going. As the weeks passed, his pride in my strength and stamina became obvious to everyone, as did my affection for him. If only, I thought, if only he could just groom and care for me, and someone else could ride me. My trooper Warren would talk a great deal about how the war was going. We were, he said, to be withdrawn to reserve camps behind our own lines. The armies, it appeared, had pounded each other to a standstill in the mud and had dug in. The dugouts had soon become trenches, and the trenches had joined one another, zigzagging across the country from the sea to Switzerland. In the spring, he said, we would be needed again to break the deadlock. The cavalry could go where the infantry could not, and were fast enough to overrun the trenches. We'd show the infantry how to do it, he said, but there was the winter to survive before the ground became hard again, and for the cavalry to be used effectively. Topthorne and I spent the winter sheltering each other as best as we could from the snow and the sleet. There's more evidence of the friendship motif. While only a few miles away, we could hear the guns pounding each other day and night incessantly. We saw the cheery soldiers smiling under their metal hats as they marched off to the front line, whistling and singing and joking as they went, and we watched the remnant struggling back, haggard and silent under their dripping capes in the rain. Every once in a while Trooper Warren would receive a letter from home, and he would read it out to me in a guarded whisper in case anyone else should overhear. The letters were all from his mother, and they all said much the same thing. "My dear Charlie," he would read, "your father hopes you are well, and so do I. We missed having you with us at Christmas. The table in the kitchen seemed empty without you. But your little brother helps when he can with the work, and father says he's coming on well, even though he's still a bit little and not strong enough yet to hold the farm horses. Minnie Whittle, the old widow from Hannaford Farm, died in her sleep last week. She was 80, so she can't grumble at that, though I expect she would if she could. She was always the world's worst grumbler. Do you remember? Well, son, that's about all the news. Your Sally from the village sends her best, and she says to tell you that she'll be writing soon. Keep safe, boy, and come home soon. Your loving mother." But Sally won't write, Joey, because she can't. Well, not very well anyway. But just as soon as this war's over and finished with, I'll get back home and I'm going to marry her. I've grown up with her, Joey, known her all my life. Suppose I know her almost as well as I know myself, and I like her a lot better. Trooper Warren broke the terrible monotony of the winter. He lifted my spirits, and I could see that Topthorne, too, welcomed every visit that he made to the horse lines. He never knew how much good he did us. During that awful winter, so many of the horses went off to the veterinary hospital, and they never came back. Like all army horses, our coats were clipped like hunters, so that all our lower quarters were exposed to the mud and rain. The weaker ones among us suffered first, for they had little resilience and went downhill fast. But Topthorne and I came through to the spring, Topthorne surviving a severe cough that shook his whole massive frame, as if it were trying to tear the life out of him from the inside. It was Captain Stewart who saved him, feeding him a hot mash and covering him as best as he could in the bleakest weather. And then, one ice-cold night in early spring with frost lying on our backs, the troopers came to the horse lines unexpectedly early. It was before dawn. So again, right here, you can see and feel that transition. New paragraph, make sure you always indent for the new paragraph. It was before dawn. There had been a night of incessant heavy barrage, and there was a new bustle and excitement in the camp. This was not one of the routine exercises we had come to expect. The troopers came along the horse lines in full service gear, each equipped with 2 bandoliers, respiratory soldier bag, rifle, and sword. We were saddled up and moved silently out of the camp and onto the road. The troopers talked of battle ahead, and all the frustrations and irritations of imposed idleness vanished as they sang in the saddle. And my trooper Warren was singing along with them as lustily as any of them. In the cold gray of the night, the squadron joined the regiment in the remnants of a little ruined village peopled only by cats, and waited there for an hour until the pale light of dawn crept over the horizon. Still the guns bellowed out their fury, and ground shook beneath us. We passed the field hospitals and the light guns before trotting over the support trenches to catch our first sight of the battlefield. Desolation and destruction were everywhere. Not a building was left intact. Not a blade of grass grew in the torn and ravaged soil. The singing around me stopped, and we moved on in ominous silence and out over the trenches that were crammed with men, their bayonets fixed to their rifles. They gave us a sporadic cheer as we clattered over the boards and out into the wilderness of no man's land, into a wilderness of wire and shale holes and the terrible litter of war. Suddenly the guns stopped firing overhead. We were through the wire. The squadron fanned out in a wide, uneven echelon, and the bugle sounded. I felt the spurs biting into my sides and moved up alongside Topthorn as we broke into a trot. "Do me proud, Joey," said Trooper Warren, drawing his sword. "Do me proud." So we end this chapter with them headed into battle. So do your best on your notebook entry as far as listing the likable and unlikable traits. You're also going to, let me see if I can show you what your notebook entry is going to look like. So, oops. Oh well, I'm not sure how to do that. Anyway, your notebook entry is going to have something at the bottom. And at the bottom, it's going to ask you to list some things that you notice in this personal narrative that are important to include. Things like good transitions, things like when you have a paragraph, you have a beginning, you have a middle, you have an end. Your middle has supporting details that support your main idea that's in your beginning, and then your end of the paragraph just kind of closes your paragraph out. Notice that spelling is really important, so that your reader can understand what words you're trying to use. Punctuation is important. Building suspense and using these strong transition words so that your reader moves through the story with you and keeping them entertained. Sometimes you might want to add a little twist in there. We'll talk about seed moments at some point. Just a lot of elaboration is pretty much what a seed moment is. So you don't want to leave any details out and have time gaps. You want to make sure that your writing is smooth and it keeps your reader engaged. So I want you to think on the story of Warhorse, and there's a place on your notebook page that you're going to be doing at the bottom that just asks you to list some of these things that I've mentioned that makes up a strong narrative, some things that you'll want to include in your writing. So be sure that you add that part to your notebook entry. Alrighty, have fun doing your work.